Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this Governors for Schools webinar. The focus of this morning's webinar is personal, social, health, and sometimes careers education, and the role that it plays in the personal development of children and young people in our schools. My name is Steve Barker, and that's me you see on the left-hand side of your screen. And apologies, we have a few formatting problems this morning because we're using a MacBook as opposed to our normal PC to actually broadcast from. So Linda's in the same room as me this morning, as opposed to being at different ends of the phone line. So morning, Linda.
Good morning, everyone.
And as I say, apologies, some of our slides may have actually lost a little bit in translation this morning, but other than that, hopefully everything will be fine. We're here from Better Governor, and it's our pleasure to actually be hosting this webinar on behalf of Governors for Schools this morning. And just a quick interlude, if we may, before we start the webinar, just to remind you, if you're not already aware, next Tuesday, the 22nd of February, is National School Governors Awareness Day, and there are a whole variety of free-to-access webinars actually being aired on the day, one of which is actually being hosted by Governors for Schools, which we're thrilled to actually welcome them to join us on that day. But there are others as well, so please do check out the website. It's www.schoolgovernorsday.co.uk. It's on the bottom of this slide here. Follow us on Twitter, and please do join in on the day. Okay, so with no more ado, let's kick off with this morning's session. I'm sorry, this is the very first slide, and this is one that's lost a little bit in translation from Microsoft to Apple, I'm afraid, so apologies. First and foremost, the aims of today's session is to really think about what the expectations are on us as governors within our schools in terms of that delivery of personal, social, health and economic education in our schools. So we're not going to set out to make everybody subject experts, but just to broaden perhaps our awareness a little bit on that. And then what we do want to focus on is reflecting on how, as governors, our responsibility is to ensure that the whole curriculum for PSHE is meeting the needs of the pupils in our schools. So as ever, there's an element of recognising context here. And last but by no means least, to actually think about the sort of questions that as governors we ought to be asking in order to actually deepen that knowledge that we've got. And of course, as ever, to ensure that our schools are complying with the various regulations and requirements upon us. And as everything that we do, we always say, we don't do what we're doing because Ofsted are coming, but it's always good to ensure that as governors, we are prepared for when Ofsted actually come to visit us. And the best preparation is actually knowing the subject matter in hand. So with no more ado, I'm going to hand over to Linda, who's going to talk you through the first two slides.
Thanks, Steve. So I think the important thing here is to think about what we already know about PSHE. It's probably something that we may have experienced ourselves as pupils at school in the past, but what is its purpose within the curriculum that is taught in schools now, right the way from when children first start at school and through secondary to when they leave? The whole purpose of including this important element in the curriculum, and the reason we're talking about it today, it's that bit of education that prepares for life both in our communities and at school now and in the future. And this is a quote from the PSHE Association, and we'll say a little bit more about the organisation in a moment, but the majority of schools will engage with this organisation, use their resources and deliver their own PSHE curriculum by using and engaging with that organisation. So they are part funded by the DFE, and they have an important role to play in this whole arena. There is, of course, a variety of guidance that fits into this legal responsibility, and this is where we start to think of this subject from a governance point of view. Well, first and foremost, our responsibility is one of compliance. There is a national curriculum framework document that it supports the delivery of the national curriculum in England and has some very important aspects of this particular PSHE education included within it. So this is not a bolt-on. It is not something that is just added if we wish. There is guidance around personal, social, health and economic education. And the economic bit also picks up the careers element that Steve mentioned just a moment ago. And together, these are very integrated documents. The guidance and the national curriculum are documents which link together and therefore what we start to think of from a governance point of view is that we're starting to think of this as part of the delivery of the national curriculum.
We've got a quick question come in here, which we'll take at this stage. Thank you, Monica, for your question. Monica's asking, does mental health and well-being sit under PSHE? I think my response to that would be, yes, it does. Of course, it's an important element of overall children and young people's personal development, and therefore a lot of the support in terms of self-help, etc., would sit within PSHE because you've actually got opportunities there through a lot of the elements of the curriculum. But of course, there's a big safeguarding element of it, which runs in parallel in terms of the support for individual pupils that schools would give there.
So let's think a little bit more about what PSHE is. So it includes all of those aspects of our young people's personal development, their social development, physical and mental health, and aspects of their economic education. And if we think about the resources that were available through that website, then there are themes or aspects that that include resources across a very wide range of an offer there. It includes careers in secondary school, and there's a statutory element of that. And so you may, if you're a secondary governor, you may be more familiar with the term PSHE, including that careers aspect. It is non-statutory except for careers, but there was a huge effort put into changes in 2020, which introduced the RHSE curriculum, which is statutory, and that was part of the 2020 Children and Social Work Act. So this has broadened the statutory aspect of PSHE, which is why it's an important moment for governors to pause and think there is a very large element of compliance here. And there is more of this that we're responsible for and need therefore to understand in order to ensure that our school is delivering the national curriculum to promote all of these aspects of a child's development, which are now intrinsically linked to making sure our young people become successful members of society later in life. There is a Governors for School campaign called All Pupils, Every Ambition, and that's running in conjunction with a webinar, Experiences of the Workplace, which is being held on the 2nd of March. So it's very important to understand that this is something that we are building our knowledge and understanding of, and increasing the opportunities for young people to engage in this world.
And we've got a question on the panel from Alexis, so thank you for that, Alexis. Alexis is asking, are we including RSHE, relationship, sex and health education, under PSHE because this is statutory? Yes, and this is Linda's point really, that although teaching of PSHE is not a statutory part of the curriculum, it is an expectation. And of course, elements like careers, which Linda's just mentioned, and of course RSHE, they are statutory, and therefore the elements that are statutory for the age ranges in your particular schools very much form part of this. And so hence Linda saying that as the curriculum develops, there will undoubtedly probably be more elements that become statutory as the years go forward. We will perhaps see it become more embedded, but the expectation is all schools teach it, the statutory and the non-statutory elements of it. So I hope that clarifies for you.
If we think a little bit about what we might consider as elements of the taught PSHE curriculum, what that might include, then we'll be thinking about the kind of aspects that we build on from here. We've just had a question in from Anna, and she's asking about how many hours should be included in the curriculum in primary and secondary schools. And this again is something that we're going to cover in a little more detail as we go along, because it will be up to your schools to decide which elements and how this is built into a planned and sequenced curriculum. So if we think about the things that are already within the national curriculum, we've got elements here of the talk curriculum that will include the things that we've just seen in terms of statutory relationship, sex and health education. And this, before it became the RSHE curriculum, always fitted into that PSHE curriculum anyway. That was where the majority of this work was covered in primary and secondary schools. There is the statutory element of careers education, which is often covered under the teaching of this. And then we've got that whole range of safeguarding. And this is about teaching children and young people to manage their own risks. So as well as what we do in school around making a safe environment, this is things like being personal safety, about a whole range of bullying, discrimination, and about their own personal responsibility and part of a community. So this is very much included as safeguarding. We've got those elements of economic well-being, which is a fundamental aspect of children being able to manage their own lives as they get older. And then we've got all of those elements around cultural education, which includes things, again, like bullying and discrimination, extremism, and a whole range of aspects there. And of course, we must never forget that this is also about including the teaching and the coverage of this subject that is appropriate for the needs of all of our pupils in our school, including those pupils who might have additional needs, special educational needs, or disabilities. We're going to move into a poll here, and Steve is going to open that poll for us, and we'll get an understanding of what you know already.
Okay, so the first poll is actually asking you how you would describe your own personal knowledge at this point in time of PSHE or PSHCE, as the case may be, and you've got 5 particular choices there. So have a quick study of those, and then if you wouldn't mind casting your vote, we'd be very grateful. I see quite a lot of you have voted already. We've got one clear winner, which is good at this point in time. Okay, so we're up to about 70% of you have actually voted now. So if those of you left to vote, if you could cast your votes as soon as possible, that would be much appreciated. Okay, so just a couple more moments, and I'm going to close that poll, and then we'll share those results with you. So there's a question from Louisa saying, should we be able to see the poll? Yes, it should be on your screen now. As I say, nearly 90% of people have voted already, so I'm not quite sure why you can't see it, Louisa, I'm afraid. Okay, I think we'll close that poll there and share those results with you, and they should be on screen now, Linda.
Thank you. So what we asked, and this was the benefit of Louisa and anybody who wasn't able to participate, what we asked is, how would you describe your personal knowledge of PSHE in your school? And we asked you just to select one answer. So we've got 23% of you saying that it's a detailed knowledge, and you know what you have to teach and what you do teach. So that's really quite impressive, I think, that there is a detailed knowledge held by some of you. 18% of you are saying that you know about relationship, sex and health education. And personally, I would have expected that to be a little bit higher, because there's been a real focus on the statutory nature of the introduction of that new curriculum by the summer of last year. 5% of you are saying that you know about careers education, secondary and RSHE. And again, this is probably reflective of the fact that there are many more of you attending today that are primary governors. But again, if you are a secondary governor and you don't know about how careers education fits into this subject, that's a question that you might already have written down to ask a little bit more about. And then 46% of you, so that is almost half of you, are saying that it's basic, you know it's talked about, but you don't think you're good on the detail. And I think that that is a very honest reflection of probably where the majority of governors in our community sit around this. And I think reflective of the fact that increasingly there are statutory elements of the curriculum that now are delivered through PSHE, it's important that we do build our knowledge as governors. And then 9% of you are saying that you don't have any knowledge, or your knowledge is non-existent, and that's why you've attended this webinar. So again, hopefully this will give you a starting point from which to build some questions, build your own knowledge. But remember, in building your own knowledge as an individual governor, what you also have a responsibility to do is to build the knowledge of the board. So this is reflective, I think, about half of our governor population probably need to build a little bit more detailed knowledge about what their school is doing in terms of PSHE. So thinking about how and when PSHE is taught, and thinking about the fact that what I mentioned earlier, most schools will have a membership of the PSHE Association, and they will use their resources. They have a range of planning tools, because this isn't something that is supposed to be, what shall we do for assembly this week? I know we'll just pick something off the website. And we may have had elements of that in the past. I'm not saying that that hasn't been true for some schools in the past, but that is not now meeting the expectation of what the national curriculum delivery is. We think about, and Steve's going to say a bit more about Ofsted in a little while, but if we think about this as part of any learning opportunity for pupils, there is an expectation that it is properly sequenced, that it is a spiral program that builds on what children already knew, and it is sequenced so that they build on that knowledge as they progress through school, onto their next school and out into the world of work. So we should have an element of regular timetabled lessons. And if you look at the PSHE Association, they're suggesting a minimum of an hour a week. And there was a question earlier about timing. This isn't the only way in which this subject is taught, because there will be in the majority of schools some form or tutor time, and there are elements of opportunity there. There will be days when the normal school timetable is collapsed to focus on certain elements of this. We've seen some aspects of that in, we had Safer Internet Day and mental health, Children's Mental Health Week very recently, that would have seen some of this work taking place in school. There are opportunities for people to come into school, for visitors to come in at all ages and stages of children's development, and for children to participate in a variety of different things, both through the discrete subjects and built in through the curriculum generally. So if you're looking at an element of science, which also builds on some of the work that links from this PSHE program, then that can be drawn on and reinforced and built on, because this is a sequence spiral program. So where does it fit in? Well, it fits into the national curriculum. So a good aspect of that is science, where we'll learn about, from a science point of view, about the way in which the body works, but there'll also be elements of growing and changing, which fits back in with the PSHE program. There is that statutory non-national curriculum element of the teaching of religious education and assemblies, and we see much of this work reinforced or supported by well-planned assemblies. There'll be a whole enrichment section here where children will be engaged in drama and productions and a whole range of things that can draw on some of these subject areas and include maybe visitors coming in and performing to some of these areas, including other pupils from other schools at different ages and stages. And then, of course, we've got a whole variety of extracurricular opportunities, including things like careers fairs and opportunities for children to build an understanding about the world of work, even at that young stage at primary school, with the different visitors from different careers and different fields of work, like firemen and policemen and doctors and all kinds of different aspects there that fit in to some of these opportunities. So it isn't just a taught one session a week offer. This is an integrated offer that is planned to fit in across all of the types of learning and opportunities that pupils have. So we might then start to think, as governors, what do we know already? And thinking back to the poll, there are some areas where we do need to improve our knowledge. Do we know how much time is dedicated to PSHE? And that will be more than that simple question, do we deliver a distinct PSHE session to pupils? We need to think about what we know about the way this is planned and put in place in school. And we need to know whether the various topics covered and how they meet those statutory requirements that we've mentioned. And again, although the PSHE association site is a membership site, you are able to see the range of resources. And I think that is a good place to build a knowledge of what might be included in order to then fuel further questions. So it will give you some areas from which you might want to ask a little bit more to build that understanding. And how the school uses those enrichment and those extracurricular activities, and some of those you might be very well aware of already, but how are those used, how are those planned to support the delivery of the PSHE curriculum? And how is coverage of the curriculum monitored across those different year groups and different key stages? And again, there are some suggestions on the association website that will show you how they have planned that across resources across different key stages. And you may well have in your school somebody on the senior leadership team who takes a leadership role on this particular area of the curriculum. It may be in a smaller school that this is led by the same person who leads on curriculum generally, but it is a good point at which to say, how does this get covered by governors? If we're not talking about this enough, which there is a suggestion from the answer to the poll that might be the case, how do we ensure that we do cover some of this, other than just the new RHSE aspect, which was introduced last year? So it's a good point at saying, let's build our knowledge, and some of these questions might help us to do that. I'm going to hand over at this stage to Steve, and he's going to take us through the remainder of the slides.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, as Linda intimated a little earlier, we're going to move on now and just think about where this sits, perhaps within reference to Ofsted, but also in that broader picture. And of course, don't forget the webinar is actually entitled PSHE and how it sits within personal development. Now, personal development is an Ofsted judgment, of course. That's not why we're talking about it. And Linda and I, and those of you who've actually attended these webinars in the past that we've led for Governors for Schools, may have heard us say this on many occasions. We don't apologise for that, because it's actually a really important point to make. But in all of our schools, none of us as governors should be doing anything just because we think Ofsted are due to come soon. We do what we do because we think it's the right thing to do for the pupils in our schools. And that couldn't be truer than for personal development. And of course, PSHE, yes, it's not statutory, although certain elements of it are in terms of RSHE and careers, etc. But morally, we should be doing it because actually we want our children, we want our young people to grow up prepared for adult life. And as we said right at the very beginning, that's what this is all about. So we need to be mindful of what Ofsted are inspecting. Of course we do, but actually we're doing this because as governors, Our oversight, based on those questions that Linda was talking about on the previous slide, our oversight is about us being assured that we are preparing our children and young people for the next stage of their education, the next stage of their lives. So I've got a quote here, which is taken from a speech that Amanda Spielman, who's Her Majesty's Chief Inspector, she made this speech in July 2019, so just a couple of months before the launch of what was then the new framework, but the current Ofsted inspection framework. And most of you who've been governors for a couple of years or so will know that this was a very different Ofsted inspection framework. But again, Ofsted do not make the rules. It's really important to stress that, in the same way that we don't do what we're doing as schools and as governors because Ofsted are coming, or we think they're coming. Ofsted don't make the rules. All Ofsted do is decide which of those rules, those regulations that underpin education generally in our schools, which of those they're going to focus on in inspection. And the new inspection model, of course, is very much focused on, they call it the quality of education, and that is a summation of pupil outcomes, quality of teaching and learning, etc. But primarily it's about the structure of the curriculum in the school. And with that in mind, this comment from Amanda Spielman here, you can see that saying that, that Ofsted will be particularly interested in how schools contribute to personal development. And she's saying children, which means children and young people, of course. And this area is now a judgment in its own right, i.e. the personal development. And it makes more space within inspection for discussing things like PSHE lessons in which wider life issues can be explored. And hopefully you can see that that fits totally into everything that Linda and I have actually said in the webinar so far. We've got one quick question on the panel from Emma. Emma's saying, are we going to talk about female genital mutilation? Not explicitly, no, we're not, Emma, but again, that is part of that broader picture. Would be covered within RSHE. It would also be covered within certain aspects of social, moral and cultural education as well. Okay, so this next slide really is just a word cloud, and I'm just showing off that I can actually make word clouds, but this is just a word cloud that I put together based on the Ofsted section in the handbook about personal development. And Ofsted describe it themselves, which is why I put this title for this slide, as preparing pupils for adult life. And you can see the phrases that are coming up in here. And I'm not going to talk about each and every one of them, but I think it's important for us to, perhaps as governors, think about, do we know for certain that our schools are actually covering these areas within that broader curriculum, perhaps mapped out on that, that brick wall that Linda spoke to a few slides back. Linda talked about inclusivity in terms of meeting the needs of all pupils. And as we said right at the very beginning, there is an implicit assumption here that schools understand the needs of their pupils. Schools know their context, and therefore they plan what they're going to do for all aspects of the curriculum, but particularly for personal development, PSHE, etc. They do it from the perspective of, are we meeting the needs of our pupils? Now, I know we've got several governors joining us today from special schools, which is always very nice to welcome you to these sessions. And if you're in a special school, of course, dependent on the needs of your pupils in terms of their special needs, you will have to adapt, or staff will have to adapt significant aspects of the curriculum, including, of course, the way in which PSHE is delivered. Thinking specifically about elements of safeguarding, for example, the way in which we teach safeguarding is about equipping those children and young people in our special schools and in all other schools for being able to cope with, shall we say, the barriers, the obstacles, some of the issues that life is actually going to throw in front of them, so that they are able to develop resilience in the same way as perhaps mainstream pupils are, but it's about adapting to their needs. And of course, the same is true of pupils in mainstream settings who have special educational needs as well. And you can see some of the other elements that we're talking here resonating with some of the things that Linda's already said anyway. You've got physical health on the right-hand side. We've got mental health and well-being, which we responded to a question right at the beginning of the session. And then you've got things like responsible and respectful active citizens. Now those are three phrases which are used an awful lot, which is why they've taken prominence here, of course. And ultimately, what Ofsted want to see, and what we as governors should have as an ambition for every single pupil in all of our schools, whatever sort of school we're governing in, is that we are preparing them for later life and hopefully for a responsible life, a life that shows respect to all elements of our community and all people, and hopefully engages an awful lot of them to becoming active citizens in that world in which they're going to grow up in as well. Because there's a lot of other elements there which I'm not going to explicitly talk through, but as I say, if there are any particular questions on any of which don't make particular sense, then please do put those on the panel. The only other thing I would actually just point out is that we've got online safety has crept in there. Linda mentioned Safer Internet Day last week. Of course, that took place. The whole aspect of online safety, you might think is actually non-statutory. It is statutory because that actually falls within the computing curriculum, which is part of a national curriculum. And of course, it's now written quite large and prominently within keeping children safe in education. So there are lots of elements here being sort of interwoven into this. It's not a clean cut, yes, this is what the curriculum looks like. There are a whole raft of responsibilities on our schools, some of them relating to compliance with legislation, some of them just because they're the right things to do for the children and the young people in our schools. Okay, just wanted to think a little bit more about where does PSHE or PSHCE, if that's what it's called in your schools, sit. Now for me, or for us I should say, it very much is about wanting as governors to see this represented across all elements of provision in our schools. And of course for that to happen, it needs to be firmly embedded within a vision. And I've got an example of a vision here. I don't apologise, I've taken this from one of the schools where I'm chair of governors. I happen to think it's actually quite a nice vision anyway, but it demonstrates the point that I want to make. I have no doubt at all that many, if not all of your schools represented here in this webinar this morning will have a similar take on this, because most schools' visions are broadly similar, of course. But this particular vision, as you can see, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading it out to you, but you can see it's very forward-looking, as a vision should be, but it's talking about what we want as outcomes for our children and young people. It's not focusing solely on learning, although that's an important element of it, because of course that's focal to everything that schools do. But the phrase in the middle, well equipped to meet the challenges of the 21st century, positively contributing to society, that's what a vision ought to be in my mind. And perhaps one of the takeaways from this session might be perhaps to go back and revisit your own school's vision and just see, does that encompass something of what we're trying to achieve as a school in terms of, perhaps it might be that broader personal development agenda, or is there something specifically that links into some of these elements of PSHE?
And just to add to that, I'm a chair at a primary school. Our strapline of our vision is building brighter futures, which I think you can see picks up those main elements of what Steve's just said. But then if we think about the values that our school is, my school in particular, very prominently promoting with its young people, you'll start to see some of those things in the word cloud that Steve showed in the previous slide about responsibility, about how they treat other people. And so the vision supported by the values and ethos of your school will start to build the planning point for your PSHE delivery, because that's what you're trying to achieve for your pupils.
Okay, so this is, we're going to launch our second poll of the session today, and with me while I just get back on the thing. So this is really, it's not a test on your learning at all, it really isn't, but this is just to hopefully clarify understanding. So what we've got is a list of 5 potential elements of the PSHE or broader curriculum. And we'd just like you to indicate, and you can tick as many as you wish on this one, which of these you think contribute to personal development or would contribute to personal development if they were relevant in your schools. So I'm launching that poll now. That should be on the screen in front of you. Okay, and we can see quite a few people responding to that now. That's good. We've had quite a few people who put comments or questions on the board about sharing the slides from today's presentation. As with all Governors for Schools webinars, the slides are made available after the webinar, and of course the recording of the webinar will be up on the Governors for Schools website very shortly as well. We do have a question on the board at the moment about certificates. I'm not aware that we do. Again, if anybody wants really to actually share with everybody else what training, what professional development as governors they've engaged in, I would suggest you just mention that in your governing body meeting and have it recorded in the minutes. Okay, we're up to about 85, 86% now. So a few of you left to vote if you could do so now, because we're going to close that poll in just a few moments. And just picking up on that last comment about engaging change generally and reporting that back. What we should, of course, all of us be doing is when we are engaging in any form of training or development as governors, is sharing what we've learned with our fellow governors. So that's why the slides are made available. That's why you can point your colleagues in the direction of not just this, but all of the vast library of webinars that Governors for Schools have on their website as a resource to hopefully deepen the knowledge of governors in all aspects of their role. Okay, I know we're going to close that poll now. And share the results with you, and this should be up on the screen. As most of you have obviously realised, every single one of these in its own way, dependent on your own school's context, of course, will make a contribution. We might at first glance think a fire engine visiting a school, that hasn't happened probably for the last couple of years for obvious reasons, of course, but those sorts of things, ambulances firing, the police taking police cars in, etc., they are making a contribution, not only to that sort of understanding the world around us, but actually there's something of the respect agenda there. There's something about adult role modeling for careers in later life. There's a whole host of reasons why that makes a contribution. Celebrating Black History Month, hopefully we can all recognise that makes a massive contribution, not just to our awareness of diversity, but also that whole raft of issues with regard to certainly understand the world around us, but certainly the issues on equality, etc., which are raised there. Pursuing diversity on governing boards, again, reflecting our context is a very important consideration. Many of you will be aware, and there have been webinars on this topic from Governors for Schools in the past. Increasing the diversity where possible on governing boards can only help to actually break down those barriers, to actually make people aware, A, that governance is doable, but it's doable by all members of our society. Compulsory sex education, yes, it's a statutory element of the RSHE curriculum. Some of it will also find its way into the National Curriculum for Science in terms of reproduction, etc. And last but by no means least, Year 10 work experience. I just happened to pick Year 10 because in the secondary school where I'm a chair, it's actually done in Year 10. It can be done in a number of other year groups as well. But yes, you're absolutely right. And the point of putting this poll in really is to demonstrate that for us as governors, part of our monitoring role is about being able to spot where we think, yes, that's something that's going to contribute towards personal development. That probably is an element of the PSHE curriculum, and possibly going wider than that as well. Question from Natalie on the panel at the moment. Thank you, Natalie. Natalie's saying there are 9 protected characteristics under law. I know this is a sample poll, but more needs to happen to celebrate and raise all of those elements. Yes, it absolutely does. And that's why in that word cloud, Natalie, equality was actually writ quite large in there for hopefully obvious reasons. But yes, we would absolutely expect schools to do that. Linda mentioned British values earlier. I have to say I don't particularly like that phrase, but that's enshrined in the national curriculum. They're not our values. They're not unique to people that live in this country, but those British values are underpinned by equality, and absolutely we should be expecting schools to be teaching the meaning of all of those values and also respect for all of those values. Again, the word tolerance is often used here. Sorry, my own views come to the fore. I'm not a fan of the word tolerance. I was always brought up to believe that toleration was actually putting up with something you didn't necessarily agree with. What we should be doing with all of those protected characteristics is that they are part of the diverse society in which we all live, in which our children and young people are growing up. And that's going to be even more diverse probably than it is now. And actually, this is therefore about not just respect, but it's about celebrating difference rather than pointing to it in any other way. So I hope that addresses your question, Natalie.
And a good question to ask as part of your governance role if you don't know the answer to that.
Absolutely. And again, with everything, as we say as governors, if you don't know, there's no such thing as a daft question. It's always worth asking, even if it's just seeking some clarity on certain issues. Okay, so in terms of our general monitoring of PSHE or PSHE, if that's what it's being called in our schools, again, come back to the point that Linda made a little earlier. This isn't generally an area that we say, let's have a designated PSHE governor. Now, we're not necessarily advocating that today, but we are saying that PSHE needs to be on the agenda. It needs to be included within our remit as governors because we have some compliance duties that relate to it. And of course, we want to know that the personal development needs of our pupils are actually being addressed in our schools. So there is a need here. How we address it is up to us entirely in our schools, but address it we must. So some of the things that we need to think about, and first and foremost, does PSHE or PSHE feature within your school development or school improvement plan? And if it does, is there somebody who has responsibility for it? It's very common in primary schools for there to be a subject leader for PSHE. That's not quite so common in secondary. In secondary schools, it's more usually the model that PSHE sits, as we've hopefully demonstrated this morning, across a whole variety of different subjects. Now, in larger schools, you may have somebody coordinating all that, but that might not necessarily be the case. So particularly in the secondary environment, it's worth actually asking that question. Well, who does have overall responsibility for personal development here? Who does coordinate the different elements of provision that are provided through both the national curriculum and the work of the school that goes beyond that?
And then I think we need to think about how your governance monitoring of either your school development plan or the way in which you've divided responsibilities, if you work as a whole team or as committees, where does this feature in your monitoring in a systematic, programmed way? Who will pick up these questions and these discussions when they make monitoring visits to school? Or is this an area you need to revisit and think, yes, we're not covering this in sufficient depth?
And again, I mean, the curriculum for PSHE goes across a whole variety of different areas. And that will change, that will flex a little bit from school to school. It will flex, again, based on the needs of pupils. There's an interesting question from Susanna on the panel at the moment, and thank you for that, Susanna. Susanna's asking, how can we help the school to ensure that the 1996 Education Act is being respected in developing an impartial curriculum teaching with unbiased views? Now, I'm sure probably Susanna's question was inspired by the criticism by the Education Secretary last week of the school in Birmingham, I think it was, discussing the Prime Minister's extracurricular activities, shall we say, over the last year or so. broad and balanced can mean a whole variety of things. I mean, it is not our responsibility to become experts on the curriculum. It's not our responsibility to scrutinize the curriculum. So my response to your question, Suzanne, would be to say that we do it by asking questions. And the question there is, well, how do the leadership of the school ensure that the curriculum is impartial and we don't have individual members of staff sharing perhaps biased views? RSHE is a very good example there, and if you think about hopefully the way in which that new curriculum was consulted on in your schools, the way in which perhaps it was briefed to us as governors, there are elements in that which a number of people perhaps find challenging, uncomfortable, or any other words in that sort of area of the dictionary, because perhaps they conflict with their own religious or other beliefs. However, we have a statutory responsibility to deliver the RSHE curriculum, and therefore it is absolutely vital, again, thinking back to the last question about those protected characteristics, these are intertwined. And I think the question about an impartial curriculum, impartial doesn't mean to say that you sit on the fence all of the time. What impartial says is that you present both sides of the argument, because that's preparing children and young people for later life as well.
There's a little bit for me there also for professional development of staff, because some elements of the RHSE curriculum do need staff to be better trained and able to have more open conversations with their pupils, especially around some of the secondary curriculum. And I know some schools are bringing people in to talk about some of those areas because they have a better understanding, a deeper knowledge, and work with those areas openly with pupils. So something there around, do staff have enough knowledge themselves to deliver this curriculum in an unbiased way, or do they pick the bits they know and therefore not cover the bits that they're not so sure on?
And some of you who've listened to some of our webinars before may have heard me say this. My wife happens to be a teacher. My wife always goes to great lengths to actually, when she's teaching various elements of the curriculum, saying to children, let's say it's an element of sex education that's in question. There are some people, there are some faiths, some religions that don't believe this. However, it's important that we all know. And I think it's getting that balance right. And as Linda says, if you're new in the profession, you might need some mentoring, some support in terms of how you actually tackle some of those. And they're not easy subjects. A lot of them are quite taboo subjects. Some of them need a little bit of sensitivity and perhaps a bit, a bit of experience, a bit of coaching in terms of how you do actually impart some of those important messages. Quick question from William here. Thanks, William. Is sex education compulsory, or do parents have the right to withdraw it? The curriculum is statutory, is the way to word the response to that. And I'm not trying to be difficult, William. Parents do have the right to withdraw their children, but only from the sex education element of it. The reproduction that's taught through the national curriculum is statutory entitlement for all pupils. So the guidance, when it came out for implementation in September 2020, even though that was pushed back to the summer of last year, made it very clear that the DfE, the government, now expects head teachers to have some not challenging conversations, but some sensitive but nonetheless focused conversations with parents and carers who perhaps do want to exercise that right of withdrawal. And there will be some, it's a small minority now, but really to talk about, well, what are the alternatives? I mean, there are some parents who want to be the people to deliver those messages to their children themselves. Others think that perhaps they're not, emotionally or physically mature enough to get those messages at certain ages. But again, it's about how schools, head teachers, really have those extended conversations, how they actually think about the narrative there. Because of course, if you've got one child that is not receiving the same knowledge at the same time as everybody else, there are potential issues being raised there. But you're absolutely right, there is a right to withdraw, but it is strongly discouraged, but it is actually a legal right to withdraw. Okay, so as far as what we might want to do as governors. So again, if there is a governor or a couple of governors that might want to actually meet with whoever that person is leading the drive for PSHE within personal development here, talk to them about the priorities within the subject, because there will be, and again, this links to that broader question, does it ever feature in the school development plan? It may be elements of it do, for example, the implementation of the new RSHE curriculum, relationship, sex and health education, that probably did for a lot of schools, but what about some of the other elements? And as I made this point a little bit earlier, it's about spotting evidence. So there will be lots of things in head teacher reports, in other subject leader reports, perhaps in something that you participate in yourself when you've been in school, that you think, well, yeah, that does make a contribution to personal development. And all of these things should be fed back, should be shared by us as individual governors with our fellow governors. And I think that's something that Linda and I would say is really important.
And it is for us as governors to start connecting information so that we see that there are bits of a report that will cover a number of different parts of what we hold the school to account for. So there, it is for us to look for those connections and to make those connections between what might be reported on around, let's say, for example, the offer of extracurricular activities this term, and maybe a return to those where we haven't had those for pandemic reasons, and some of the delivery of some of these areas that we've talked about that are very obviously PSHE. And hopefully this presentation this morning has allowed you to pick some of those elements and spot those more easily.
And Sonia's put a question on the panel, so thank you, Sonia. And Sonia's asking, what elements should we look out for in a head teacher report to spot evidence? And again, a lot of those things that we've mentioned already, so we keep coming back, but it's because it's topical. Say for Internet Day last week, what did your school do, if anything, to actually support that? And again, Children's Mental Health Week. There will have been a whole variety of issues. I know that there was a drama workshop actually in a couple of schools that I'm involved in that was actually going in and talking about some of the dangers on the internet last week. Again, you might think, well, okay, that's part of the computing curriculum, that's great. There's a safeguarding element. There's also a personal development PSHE element there. And again, lots of other things. So particularly perhaps look at some of the enrichment activities that are actually being offered by your schools. The menu may have been quite restricted in the last couple of years, but I think many schools are planning, certainly for the next half of the spring term and for the summer term, to bring a lot of those things back. Think about, and actually, if you can't see all these things, ask, do any of these actually feed into personal development? Are any of these relevant in terms of personal education? I think they're two very good questions that we should be asking as governors.
And the way in which a residential trip builds a whole range of social and community and responsibility elements of children's development, and forest schools. There are lots of bits of this information that we need to connect to understand what the offer looks like across a whole range of learning opportunities. And
nice comment here from I think it's Mikey. Sorry if I'm getting your name wrong, Mikey. I do apologise. But Mikey's saying he's a new wellbeing governor and has set up a wellbeing council in the school he's a governor in, which includes the lead for PSHE as a member, and she reports to the council, which feeds both the head teacher and the full governing body. That's a lovely initiative, and it'd be nice to see more things like that coming to the fore. And of course, one of the things that we have actually seen during the pandemic is, a rise in the level of concerns about children and young people's well-being and mental health, and of course workload and mental health well-being issues for staff as well. So it's on the agenda quite rightly, and it should be. One of our webinars on National School Governance Awareness Day next week is actually on workload and well-being. It is topical, it is something, but from a pupil perspective, I think more and more of us should be asking questions. Well, are we seeing some of these issues emerging in our school? And then, of course, the most important question of all is always the so what question. Well, if they're emerging, what are we doing about it? And again, perfectly reasonable question, and I think an essential question that we should be asking. So thank you for that.
And a positive approach to mental health will have a positive impact on academic success.
Again, question here from Wakar, who's asking, can governors ask to collect certain data independently? School administration will generally have incentives to highlight certain elements and suppress others. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that comment. And my last bullet point here is one that I'm actually passionate about in my own schools, but Linda and I are passionate about it generally. As governors, we shouldn't be putting demands on our schools to produce information just for us. If it's being produced just for us as governors, I think we have to question, why do we want it? Is it something that's missing elsewhere? In which case, maybe it's reasonable. But actually, what we should be asking our schools to do is share with us the information that you've got, share with us the information that you use to lead the school on a day-to-day basis when we as governors are not present. So I think governance for me has to be based on trust. That leads neatly into another plug for our School Governors Awareness Day next week. There's a webinar at lunchtime all about the role that trust plays in governance and more generally in leadership as well. But I think we have to ask questions to, as Linda said, a word that Ofsted are using quite a lot now, connect. Often used to use this horrible word triangulation, that's disappearing from the lexicon, thankfully. But it's about us as governors being able to connect information. So rather than perhaps harbour the belief that things aren't being shared, if there's something that perhaps we're not aware of as governors, ask the question. Ask if there's are there data sets that relate to certain elements of provision here. Again, I mean, an obvious one that perhaps springs to mind at the moment because it's topicality, the peer-on-peer or child-on-child, as it's now called, sexual abuse and violence. All of our schools are taking this very seriously, hopefully, and therefore we are looking at the way in which data is logged. We are looking at the way in which incidents are recorded. Now, it may well be that if the school says, no, there are no incidents, that's an accurate reflection. But if I was presented with that, and I think I probably have been in my own school, I would ask the question, do we believe that our students, our young people are happy with the idea of coming forward? Are they comfortable talking to adults about that? Is there more that we could do that way? So I think it's about turning it around and actually making it perhaps a constructive question as opposed to possibly a slightly negative criticism.
And it is about building a partnership. And for some of us, we'll have very good working relationships with our head teachers. For some of us in schools that maybe have a little bit more of a journey to go, there may be a need to establish and build trust in order to move forward.
Absolutely. Just a couple of quick links for you in terms of references to some of the documents that we've talked about. Linda mentioned at the beginning, PSHE Association. We're not trying to insinuate that you should all become experts in PSHE. That's not the intention, but there is a lot of really good, valuable information on there, including links to the National Governors Association joint publication. And there's a section in there on governance, which is well worth a read. Couple of other quick questions. Oh, sorry, what have I done there? I followed the link inadvertently. Sorry, I don't know how to get out of that. I do apologise, folks. But really just wanted to make the point that we are not experts, but we do have to ensure that our schools are actually meeting their responsibilities here. So the key thing for us is to make sure as governors we are monitoring effectively, and we are, as far as that strategic oversight is concerned, in possession of, if you like, the highlights of what's happening. There's a nice question on the panel from Vina. Vina's saying, should governors ask to attend some PSHE insets? Absolutely, yes. Brilliant idea. And I think if you, as governors, if we have time to do that, we should certainly engage in that.
And remember, the important thing there is to understand that it's happening. So you've got some evidence there. Yes, there are insets being arranged and teachers are attending those, but it fits within a plan, because this should be a planned curriculum. And the impact of attending that inset is what? And how do you follow that up?
One last question, because we're rapidly running out of time, folks. Tim is asking, would it be relevant to look for evidence of working in partnership with colleagues? for example, in the NHS with regard to mental health, as well as exploring career opportunities. Yes, absolutely. Again, no names, no pack drill, etc. But absolutely. And again, just going back to the last question, one set of data that perhaps governors in secondary schools don't always look at, which they could because it's freely available to the school, is that destination data. There's a bit of a time lag in getting it, but do we know what proportion of our children, young people, when they leave secondary school, go into the workplace, go into further education, go into higher education, etc.? Okay, so just a very quick reminder, and I'm sorry I've lost the slides now, so I can't move them on, but as I say, the handout will be available, as will be the recording of this session, folks. National School Governors Awareness Day next week. Please do follow that link on the second slide. There are free webinars going on throughout the day, which you can access. We hope to be able to welcome some of you there. But just remains for Linda and I to say thank you very much indeed again for joining us this morning. If there are some questions on the panel which we haven't responded to directly, we will go through those and we'll actually get back to you individually on those. But the sun is shining where we are at the moment. I hope it is where you are today as well, although the forecast is not good for the rest of the week, I don't think. But enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us, and stay safe and healthy.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks very much, everybody. Bye-bye.